Abandoned in the freezing snow with 4 puppies, she lowers her head, hoping for mercy. The 18-wheeler's headlights carved through the pre-dawn darkness like dull knives, barely penetrating the curtain of swirling snow. John Miller's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against the black leather. 20 years on the road had taught him to respect December mornings in Minnesota, where the temperature could drop faster than a broken promise. 6 hours into his Minneapolis to Chicago run, the cab's heater hummed steadily, fighting against the -15-degree chill outside. The radio crackled with static between stations, reminding him of how alone he was on this stretch of highway. He'd turned it off an hour ago, preferring the familiar rumble of his Peterbilt. "You're never really alone, John," Catherine used to say. "Angels are everywhere, just waiting for us to notice them." The memory of his late wife's voice, clear as morning bells, made his chest tighten. 2 years since cancer took her, but some mornings it felt like yesterday. He could still see her tending to the bird feeders in their backyard, wrapped in that blue cardigan she loved, silver hair catching the sunlight. Movement caught his eye, a flash of something pale against the dirty snowbank ahead. John squinted, his foot easing off the accelerator. In his line of work, you learn to trust your instincts about such things. Could be debris, could be trouble, could be a dog. A large one, light-colored, moving sluggishly along the shoulder. "Not my problem," he muttered, but Catherine's voice whispered in his mind again. "Angels are everywhere." John cursed under his breath, already signaling to pull over. The big rig's air brakes hissed in protest as he guided the truck onto the shoulder, the engine's idle dropping to a low grumble. He grabbed his heavy coat and flashlight from behind the seat. The bitter cold hit him like a physical blow as he climbed down from the cab. His boots crunched in the crusty snow, leaving deep impressions as he made his way back along the trailer's length. The dog had stopped moving, watching him with wary eyes that caught the reflection of his flashlight. It was a female, some kind of retriever mix, her coat matted and dirty. But it wasn't until he got closer that John saw what made his heart sink. She wasn't alone. Huddled against her in a shallow depression in the snowbank were 4 puppies, no more than a few weeks old. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, his words forming clouds in the freezing air. The mother dog's tail gave a single, tentative wag. John knelt slowly, keeping his movements gentle. The mother watched him but didn't growl. Her eyes held an intelligence that reminded him of Catherine's old golden retriever, Max. One of the puppies whimpered, a tiny sound almost lost in the wind. "It's okay, girl," he said softly, extending his hand. "I'm not going to hurt you." The mother dog stretched her neck forward, sniffing his fingers. Her nose was warm against his skin, a small miracle in the biting cold. Then, as if she'd made a decision, she stood on shaky legs and took a step toward him. That's when John noticed the crude rope collar around her neck, frayed where it had been cut or chewed through. This wasn't a stray. Someone had abandoned her here, her and her puppies, leaving them to freeze to death on the coldest night of the year. The realization brought a surge of anger that warmed him more than his coat. Catherine had always said there was a special place in hell for people who abandoned animals. Looking at the mother dog's trusting eyes, John couldn't help but agree. He shrugged out of his coat, despite the cold's teeth snapping at him through his flannel shirt. "Come on, girl. Let's get you and your little ones out of this weather." The mother dog seemed to understand. She stood aside as John gathered the puppies, wrapping them carefully in his coat. They were so cold, their tiny bodies like ice against his hands. One of them, smaller than the others with a distinctive white patch on its chest, barely moved at all. "Hang in there, little guy," John murmured, cradling the bundle close. The mother followed him back to the truck without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting for him all along. Getting them all into the cab took some doing, but soon the mother was settled in the passenger seat. Her puppies nestled in John's coat on the sleeper berth behind them. He cranked up the heat, watching as the mother dog's eyes drooped with exhaustion and relief. "First stop is about 10 miles ahead," he told her, putting the truck in gear. We'll figure out what to do from there." The dog's tail thumped against the seat, and John felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for a long time, beginning to thaw. As the truck merged back onto the highway, John glanced at his unexpected passengers. The mother had turned to check on her puppies, her expression so tender it made his throat tight. Catherine's words echoed in his mind once more. Angels are everywhere. Maybe she'd been right all along. Maybe angels didn't always have wings and halos. Sometimes they had 4 legs and fur, showing up exactly when you needed them most. The truck's headlights continued to pierce the darkness ahead, but now they seemed to shine a little brighter, as if pointing the way towards something new, something important. John Miller had no way of knowing it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine, all because he'd chosen to stop on a cold winter morning. The Flying J truck stop emerged from the snow like a neon oasis, its lights reflecting off the frozen parking lot. John guided his rig into one of the oversized spaces, careful not to jostle his sleeping passengers. The mother dog's eyes snapped open as soon as the engine died, instantly alert. "Easy there, girl," he soothed. "We're just making a pit stop." The truck stop's convenience store was mostly empty at this hour, save for a few bleary-eyed travelers and Jerry, the overnight clerk John had known for years. The elderly man's eyebrows shot up as John entered, the mother dog padding quietly beside him, his coat bundle of puppies cradled carefully in his arms. "Well, would you look at that?" Jerry said, adjusting his thick glasses. John Miller, the lone wolf himself, seems to have found himself a family. "Found is right," John replied, explaining the situation as Jerry came around the counter to get a better look. The mother dog accepted Jerry's gentle pat, but kept her eyes fixed on her puppies. "Poor things," Jerry muttered, his weathered face creasing with concern. "You know, you're the 3rd trucker this month to mention abandoned dogs along that stretch. Something fishy's going on out there." John's interest sharpened. "3rd? What happened to the others?" "First guy just called animal control. 2nd one took the dog he found to a shelter in Madison." Jerry paused, scratching his chin. "But here's the weird part. All the dogs were breeding females, according to what I heard. Pure breeds, too." The mother dog pressed against John's leg as a customer entered, bringing a blast of cold air with them. The smallest puppy in John's arms whimpered, and he instinctively held them closer. "Listen," Jerry said, lowering his voice. "My daughter Amy's a vet tech over at Riverside Animal Hospital. It's about 5 miles east of here. Take them there. I'll call ahead and let her know you're coming." John nodded gratefully, but something was nagging at him. "Jerry, you said pure breeds. Any idea what kind?" "Golden retrievers, mostly. Heard someone mention a place called Golden Paws Labs that got shut down last year. Used to be a big breeding operation about 50 miles north of here." Jerry's expression darkened. "Had some trouble with the law, from what I remember." The mother dog's ears perked up at the mention of Golden Paws, or maybe John just imagined it. Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than abandoned dogs. "Thanks, Jerry. I'll head over to Riverside now." John started to leave, then turned back. "Hey, any chance you got some food we could spare for Mama here?" Jerry was already reaching under the counter. He pulled out a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of water. "On the house. And John," he hesitated, "watch yourself. Some stories I heard about that Golden Paws place. Well, let's just say some people don't like their business being questioned." The warning followed John back to his truck, settling uncomfortably in his gut like day-old coffee. As he helped the mother dog back into the cab, his hand brushed against her rope collar again. This time, he noticed something else, a small metal tag, mostly scratched away, but with traces of what might have been a logo. The drive to Riverside Animal Hospital took less than 15 minutes. The building was dark except for the emergency entrance, where a young woman with purple-streaked hair was waiting outside. She waved as John parked. "I'm Amy," she called out, hurrying over. "Dad said you've got some special guests who need attention?" The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Amy turned out to be as efficient as she was friendly, quickly setting up an exam room and checking each puppy thoroughly while the mother dog watched with nervous attention. "She's a purebred golden retriever," Amy confirmed, running a scanner over the mother's shoulder blades. "No microchip, though. I put her at about 3 years old. She's been bred at least twice before this litter." John, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened. "How can you tell?" "Signs in her tissue, where on her body. This wasn't a responsible breeding situation." Amy's face hardened as she examined the rope collar, which she'd carefully removed. "This isn't the first dog we've seen like this. There's been talk in the veterinary community about a puppy mill operation that didn't quite die when it was supposed to." The smallest puppy, the one with the white patch, was struggling to nurse when the others had finished. Amy gave him special attention, supplementing with formula from a tiny bottle. "This little guy's a fighter," she said softly, "but he'll need extra care." John found himself reaching out to stroke the puppy's head with one finger. "Does he have a chance?" "With the right care, yes." Amy looked at him thoughtfully. You know, most people would have just called animal control and gone on their way. The mother dog had settled her head on John's knee while he sat on the floor beside her. Her eyes, warm and trusting, met his. "Yeah, well," John cleared his throat. "Sometimes you don't choose to get involved. Sometimes getting involved chooses you." Amy smiled, reminding him suddenly of Catherine. "Dad said you're a long-haul trucker. What are you going to do with them?" It was a question John had been avoiding since he first stopped on the highway. The responsible thing would be to leave them here, let the professionals handle it. He had a job to do, deliveries to make. He couldn't exactly run a dog sanctuary from his truck. But then the mother dog sighed, her breath warm against his leg, and the small puppy made a tiny squeak as he finally found his way to nurse. John thought about empty houses and quiet cabs, about Catherine's voice speaking of angels, about Jerry's warning and scratched-out tags that might hold answers. "First," he said slowly, "I'm going to make some calls about my cargo. Then, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear everything you know about Golden Paws Labs." Amy's expression turned serious. "You sure about that? Some of the locals don't like people asking questions about what happened there." John looked down at the mother dog and her puppies, thinking about how they'd been left to die in the snow. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'm sure." What he didn't say was that for the first time in 2 years, he felt truly awake. There was a mystery here, and these dogs needed help. Catherine would have said that was no coincidence. The smallest puppy had fallen asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling against his mother's side. John made a decision. "Think you could show me how to bottle feed him? Just in case?" Amy's smile returned. "Of course. But first, these guys need names, especially this little fighter." John touched the white patch on the smallest puppy's chest. "Ben," he said without hesitation. "His name is Ben." "Ben?" Amy asked. "After my father. He was small too, but he never backed down from fighting for what was right." The mother dog's tail thumped against the floor, as if in approval. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. It was going to be a very interesting day. By mid-morning, John had made arrangements to delay his Chicago delivery and transfer his cargo to another driver. The mother dog, whom Amy had started calling Lucy, and her puppies were resting comfortably in one of the hospital's kennels, all except Ben, who needed warmth and constant monitoring in an incubator. "Golden Paws Labs," Amy said, spreading out some newspaper clippings on the break room table. "Officially closed 14 months ago after a raid by state authorities. They found evidence of unauthorized breeding practices, falsified papers, and animal neglect." John studied the grainy photos of a sprawling facility surrounded by pine trees. But no arrests. The owner, James Warren, disappeared before the raid, left everything behind. Amy tapped one of the articles. "The weird thing is, some of the locals swear they've seen lights at the old facility at night. And then there's the dogs showing up on highways." John pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he'd taken of Lucy's collar tag. Could this have been their logo? Amy leaned in, squinting. Hard to tell with all the scratches. But, hold on. She hurried from the room, returning with a file folder. Look at this. She placed a document on the table, veterinary records from a Golden Paws dog treated at Riverside the previous year. In the corner was a logo, a stylized golden paw print inside a circle. Same design, John murmured, comparing it to the scratch tag. Lucy came from there, all right. Question is, who's still operating the place? A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform filled the doorway, his face set in stern lines. Miss Harper. He nodded to Amy, then fixed his gaze on John. Mr. Miller? I'm Sheriff Roberts. Mind if we have a word? John shared a quick glance with Amy before following the sheriff to a small office. Roberts closed the door and remained standing, his thumbs hooked in his belt. Heard you've been asking questions about Golden Paws, he said without preamble. Mighty interested in a case that's been closed for over a year. Just trying to help some abandoned dogs, John replied carefully. Seems like more than coincidence them showing up like this. Roberts's expression didn't change. My advice? Leave it alone. You did your good deed, saved those dogs. Now it's time to get back on the road where you belong. Is that a suggestion or a threat? Sheriff, let's call it friendly counsel. Roberts moved to the door, then paused. Shame about your truck, by the way. John's stomach clenched. What about my truck? Oh, you haven't heard? Someone slashed your tires while you were in here playing detective. All 18 of them. Roberts smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Like I said, might be best to move on. Once you get those tires fixed, of course. After the sheriff left, John stood in the parking lot, staring at his disabled rig. Each tire had been methodically punctured, a professional job that would cost thousands to repair. Amy joined him, her face pale. John, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you. Sheriff Roberts used to do security consulting for Golden Paws before. Before what? Before his brother-in-law James Warren owned it. She hugged herself against the cold. Most people around here don't talk about it. The Warrens and Roberts have a lot of influence in the county. John's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Last warning. Leave town. Forget the dogs. He showed it to Amy, whose eyes widened. They're scared, she whispered. You must be getting close to something. Or they just don't want anyone looking too hard at those woods at night. John squared his shoulders. Amy, could you look after Lucy and the puppies for a few hours? I need to make some calls. The first call was to his old friend Mike Chun at the Chicago Tribune. The second was to a trucking buddy who owed him a favor, one with connections to animal rights groups. The third was to Jerry at the Flying J, who knew every piece of gossip within 50 miles. By late afternoon, John had a clearer picture. 3 different sources confirmed suspicious activity at the old Golden Paws site. More importantly, Mike had dug up financial records showing Sheriff Roberts had received large cash deposits around the same time dogs started appearing on highways. They're still operating, John told Amy when he returned to the hospital. But they're sloppy now, desperate, dumping dogs that don't meet their breeding standards. But why take the risk? The original operation was shut down. Because purebred puppies are big business. Thousands of dollars each, all cash. No questions asked. John watched through the window as Lucy gently nosed Ben, who had been briefly returned to her for bonding. And I bet if we tested Lucy's puppies, we'd find they're not just regular Goldens. They're probably some designer breed worth even more. Amy's phone chimed. She read the message and paled. They just threatened to pull our veterinary license if we don't turn over the dogs. Said they have evidence we've been practicing without proper certificates. They're getting desperate, John said. Question is, why these dogs? Why now? As if in answer, Ben let out a small whimper. John watched as Lucy tenderly cleaned her smallest pup, and suddenly something clicked. DNA, he breathed. These puppies, they're evidence. Lucy must have been their prime breeding dog, and those puppies could prove they're still operating. Amy finished. That's why they want them so badly. With DNA testing, we could prove these puppies came from their breeding stock. A shadow passed by the window, someone in the parking lot. Then another. John moved quickly, turning off the lights. Back door. He whispered to Amy, "Now, get Lucy and the puppies ready to move." "Move where?" "I've got a friend coming with a rescue transport, but we've got to hold out for 2 hours." John pulled out his phone, quickly typing, "And I'm done playing defense." The text he sent was to Mike Chun, green light. Run the story. Within minutes, his phone lit up with confirmation. Breaking news alert. Corruption and illegal breeding operation investigation. Now they just had to survive the next 2 hours. In the darkness, Ben's tiny whimper echoed again, reminding John exactly what he was fighting for. The back room of Riverside Animal Hospital had never felt smaller than it did in those tense minutes after sunset. John and Amy had moved Lucy and her puppies into the secure treatment area, where thick walls and a solid steel door offered some protection. Ben was back in his incubator, the quiet hum of its motor the only sound besides Lucy's occasional soft whines. "My friend's transport is still 90 minutes out," John whispered, checking his phone. The breaking news story had exploded online, with Mike Chen's article detailing suspected corruption and ongoing illegal breeding operations. "But I don't think our visitors are planning to wait that long." Amy was preparing syringes of sedative, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "If they try to take the dogs, we can at least prove they were here. I've got cameras running." A sharp crack echoed from the front of the building, the sound of splintering wood. Lucy's ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in her throat. "Back in trance," John mouthed to Amy, pointing toward the emergency exit. She nodded, already gathering the puppies into a transport carrier. Ben would need to be moved last, his incubator running on a portable battery. Heavy footsteps approached down the hallway. John positioned himself beside the door, his heart pounding but his mind surprisingly clear. The door handle turned slowly. "It's locked," a muffled voice said. "Break it down," came the response, a voice John recognized as Sheriff Roberts. "And remember, no marks on the dogs. They're worth more than all of you combined." John caught Amy's eye and nodded. She pressed a button on her phone, a signal they'd arranged earlier. Immediately, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "Shit!" someone cursed. "Roberts, you said this was cleared." "It's a bluff," the sheriff snarled. "Break down that damn door." The first impact against the door made Lucy bark sharply. The puppies, startled, began to whimper, all except Ben, who remained eerily quiet in his incubator. John's phone vibrated, a text from Mike Chun. "State Police en route. Hold on." The door shuddered under another blow. Amy had finished securing the other puppies and was now carefully disconnecting Ben's incubator. Lucy watched intently, staying close to her smallest pup. A third blow, and the door frame began to splinter. John braced himself, remembering something Catherine used to say about moments of truth revealing who people really are. The door burst open with a crash. 3 men pushed through, led by Sheriff Roberts and a thin man with cold eyes whom John instantly recognized from the newspaper photos, James Warren, the former owner of Golden Paws. Well, Warren said, his voice as icy as his eyes. A trucker and a vet tech playing hero. "How sweet." He gestured to his men. "Get the dogs." "That's not happening," John said quietly, standing his ground. Warren pulled out a gun, pointing it casually at John's chest. "It wasn't a request. Those dogs are my property. Breeding stock like that doesn't grow on trees, especially that runt. Do you have any idea what people will pay for a micro golden?" Understanding dawned on John. "That's what this is about? You're breeding them to be tiny, like designer puppies? A miniature golden retriever with the right genetics? Worth 50 grand easy." Warren's smile was sharp. "Lucy there carries the gene. We've been trying to perfect it for years. By forcing her to breed until she nearly died?" Amy's voice shook with anger. "By abandoning her puppies when they weren't small enough. Casualties of progress," Warren shrugged. Now, step aside. The sirens were getting closer. Real ones now, not just Amy's recording. Warren's men shifted nervously. Jim, Roberts warned, we need to go. Not without those dogs. Warren stepped forward, gun steady. Last chance. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Warren moved toward the carrier containing her puppies, Lucy launched herself forward with a snarl that contained nothing of her previous gentleness. Her powerful body slammed into Warren, sending the gun skittering across the floor. John didn't hesitate. He tackled the nearest man as Amy kicked the gun further away. Lucy had Warren pinned, her teeth bared inches from his throat, but not biting, showing more restraint than her former owner deserved. Roberts reached for his own weapon, but before he could draw it, the room filled with shouts and bright lights. State police officers poured through both entrances, weapons drawn. Police! Everyone on the ground. The next few minutes were chaos. Warren, Roberts, and their men were cuffed and led away, their protests drowned out by the reading of rights and the scratching of pens on arrest reports. Lucy returned to her puppies, checking each one carefully before lying down beside Ben's incubator. Perfect timing, John told the state police sergeant as things calmed down. How'd you get here so fast? Anonymous tip about ongoing criminal activities, plus that Tribune article? The sergeant grinned. Let's just say we've been wanting to catch these guys in the act for months. Had a team ready to go. Amy was checking the puppies, her professional calm returned. They're all fine. Even Ben's vitals are stable. She looked at John. What you did? Standing up to them like that. I had help, John said, watching Lucy nuzzle Ben through the incubator's clear side. Seems like Catherine was right about angels coming in all forms. Outside, news vans were already arriving, their lights cutting through the darkness. The story would be everywhere by morning, corruption exposed, dogs saved, criminal breeding operation finally shut down for good. But John wasn't thinking about headlines. He was watching Ben, smallest of the litter, fighting for every breath but growing stronger each hour. The puppy reminded him of himself in a way, dealing with loss, struggling to find purpose, but refusing to give up. You know, Amy said softly, they'll all need homes once they're strong enough, especially Ben. He'll need someone who understands about beating the odds. John looked at Lucy, who met his gaze with those knowing eyes. She trusted him on that cold highway, trusted him to help her family. Maybe it was time he trusted himself to start a new family too. I've been thinking about getting off the long-haul routes anyway, he said. Maybe do some local driving instead. Buy that little house Catherine and I always talked about, the one with the big yard. Lucy's tail thumped against the floor, and even Ben seemed to wiggle slightly in his incubator, as if in approval. 3 months later, spring arrived in Minnesota with a gentle warmth that seemed to wash away the last memories of that frigid winter night. John stood in the backyard of his new home, a modest ranch-style house with weathered blue shutters and, most importantly, a sprawling fenced yard that Catherine would have loved. Lucy bounded across the fresh grass, her coat gleaming golden in the morning sun, looking nothing like the desperate mother he'd found in the snow. Behind her, 3 rambunctious puppies tumbled and played, all of them adopted by families within a 50-mile radius, close enough for regular family reunions, as Amy called them. And then there was Ben. Come on, little guy, John encouraged, watching the smallest puppy navigate the shallow steps of the back porch. Ben was still tiny for his age, but what he lacked in size, he made up for in determination. Each step was a considered effort, but he hadn't given up once. Just like his mother, Ben had proved to be a fighter. Those first weeks had been touch and go, with John sleeping on a cot at Riverside Animal Hospital, helping with late-night feedings. Amy had joked that he'd earned an honorary vet tech degree. The Golden Paws case had made national headlines. Warren, Roberts, and their associates were facing significant prison time. The investigation had uncovered similar operations in 3 other states, leading to a broader crackdown on illegal breeding facilities. Look who's here, Amy's voice called from the side gate. She visited regularly, officially to check on Ben's progress. Though John suspected she had other reasons, particularly after he'd caught her and Lucy sharing knowing looks during her increasingly lengthy visits. Ben's whole body wiggled with excitement as he finally conquered the last step, making his way to Amy. The white patch on his chest, now a distinctive bow tie shape, seemed to glow against his golden fur. "He's getting stronger every day," Amy said, scooping him up. "Hard to believe he's the same puppy we weren't sure would survive." John watched as Lucy herded her other puppies back toward the house, maintaining the perfect balance between protective mother and gentle guide. She taught him something about that balance, about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. "Got something to show you," he said to Amy, leading her inside. The house was simply furnished, but the walls told a story. Photos of Catherine smiled down from several frames, now joined by new pictures. Lucy and her puppies in the snow, Ben's first wobbly steps, Amy holding a sleeping Ben during those long nights at the hospital. But the newest addition was what he wanted to show her. In the kitchen, beside the back door, hung a brand new sign for Miller's Second Chance Transport. "Local routes only," John explained, specializing in animal transport for shelters and rescue organizations. "Turns out there's quite a demand." Amy's eyes lit up. "John, that's perfect. But what about your long-haul work? 20 years on the road is enough. Besides," he gestured to where Ben had curled up in Lucy's favorite sunspot, "I've got reasons to stay closer to home now." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the puppies settle in for their afternoon nap. Lucy rested her head on Ben's back, a gesture she'd maintained since his first precarious days. "Catherine would be proud," Amy said softly. Of all of this, John felt the familiar ache at his wife's name, but now it came with something else, a warm certainty that she would indeed approve. She'd always said angels appeared when you needed them most. Looking at Lucy and Ben, at the new purpose he'd found, at Amy's gentle presence beside him, he knew Catherine had been right all along. "You know," he said, "there's a rescue transport run to Chicago next week. Could use a vet tech's help, if you're interested. Maybe grab dinner while we're there?" Amy's smile was brighter than the spring sunshine. "I'd like that." Outside, a breeze stirred the wind chimes Catherine had hung years ago, creating a melody that mixed with the soft snoring of puppies and the distant chirping of returning spring birds. Ben stirred slightly, making one of his distinctive squeaky noises that had earned him the nickname Little Horn among the clinic staff. John Miller looked at his unlikely family, a golden retriever who'd taught him about trust, a tiny puppy who'd shown him the power of persistence, and a purple-haired vet tech who'd helped him believe in second chances. The empty spaces in his heart, once so vast and cold, had been filled with something new. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but a different kind of love, one that had found him on a snowy highway when he least expected it. Lucy opened one eye and thumped her tail against the hardwood floor, as if reading his thoughts. Ben squeaked again in his sleep, and Amy laughed softly, her hand finding John's. Sometimes, John realized, the best stories don't end with everything being fixed or forgotten. They end with new beginnings, with the promise of more stories to come. And if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, they end with the understanding that family isn't always what you're born into or what you've lost. Sometimes it's what finds you on a cold winter morning, waiting for you to stop and notice that angels really do come in all forms, leading you home in ways you never expected.